The glitch in the system. Alex Ramsey regarded Tuesdays with a particular venom. The entire workweek at the U.S. Embassy in Istanbul was a slog, but Tuesdays were a uniquely spirit-crushing affair. Ambassador Davies' weekly staff meeting, a 3-hour slog through bureaucratic quicksand that left Alex feeling like his gray matter was actively liquefying. Officially, he was the embassy's junior telecom specialist. In reality, he was a glorified tech support drone whose days revolved around coaxing life back into recalcitrant routers, replenishing empty printer cartridges, and gently assuring panic-stricken diplomats that, yes, their computers were indeed plugged in. That IT wasn't quite the vibrant center of international intrigue he dreamt of during his State Department internship, yet this Tuesday offered a faint glimmer of novelty. A Priority 1 ticket had landed in his queue. The ambassador's secure phone line was kaput, worse than down. Actually, IT was emitting a cacophony of static and fractured syllables, the dying gasps of a digital automaton. That he made his way to the ambassador's sanctum, his toolbox suddenly leaden. The opulent carpets and stern portraits of diplomatic forebears only deepened his sense of inconsequence. A perfunctory knock was answered by the ambassador's secretary, a woman whose gaze could have flash-frozen the Golden Horn. The offending phone sat on a colossal mahogany desk, as incongruous as a paperclip at a black tie gala. Alex initiated diagnostics. The line was undeniably fried, a chaotic blizzard of rogue frequencies. That he traced the cables, checking connections with a practiced dexterity, his fingers dancing across the intricate web like a seasoned surgeon. That he pinpointed the source of the issue behind a bookcase, a junction box housing a frayed wire, hanging on by a thread. A simple splice. That he retrieved his tools, the familiar snip of the wire cutters, a small, comforting sound in the otherwise oppressively formal atmosphere. Almost unconsciously, he patched the signal through his diagnostic headset to ensure a clean connection. Then he heard it, not the ambassador's polished tones he'd expected, but a fractured, unintelligible torrent of voices jabbering in rapid Turkish, punctuated by bursts of what sounded unmistakably like Mandarin. The transmission was fragmented, as if a conversation had been shattered into a million pieces and haphazardly reassembled. He frowned, pulse quickening. This was far from standard. Embassy communications were encrypted, ironclad. Even a compromised connection shouldn't bleed into other channels like this. IT felt as though the very structure of the communication was unraveling. Alex swiftly captured the audio stream onto his handheld recorder, his fingers betraying a slight tremor. Protocol demanded immediate reporting, flagging this as a dire security breach. Yet something in the frantic timbre of the voices, the raw urgency that clawed through the noise, stayed his hand. That he had to decipher the chaos, even if just in snippets. He finished the repair, the ambassador's secretary bestowing a curt nod as he gathered his equipment. Back in his cramped basement office, hemmed in by blinking servers and a Medusa's coil of cables, Alex replayed the recording. The distortion was even more pronounced, the layers of encryption amplified by the tinny speakers. He dedicated the next hour to cleaning up the sound, meticulously scrubbing away static and interference. He cycled through every decryption program accessible on the embassy network, but to no avail. The encryption was unlike anything he'd encountered, a bespoke system, designed to thwart standard protocols. Frustration began to simmer. He was a telecom specialist, not a cryptographer. His mandate was troubleshooting phones, not unraveling global conspiracies. Yet the persistent conviction that something was profoundly amiss refused to release its grip. He shifted gears. Instead of brute-forcing the encryption, he resolved to isolate the individual voices. He slowed the recording, extracting each discernible fragment of speech, feeding it into voice recognition software. The software delivered a scattershot of possibilities. A faint match for a known Turkish arms dealer, another hinting at a mid-level bureaucrat within the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, all inconclusive, swamped by the pervasive noise. Just as he was on the verge of conceding defeat, the software highlighted a name with a surprisingly high probability: General Zhao, a hawkish figure in the People's Liberation Army, notorious for his uncompromising stance on international affairs and suspected ties to renegade elements within the Chinese government. Alex sank back in his chair, his mind a whirlwind of possibilities. What was a Chinese general doing on a secure line within the U.S. Embassy, conversing in Turkish? And why was the dialogue so heavily fortified, so deliberately concealed? He replayed the entire recording, this time listening for context, for any thread that might link the disparate phrases. He caught snippets: shipment, delivery, Bosphorus, and then, a chillingly distinct phrase uttered in heavily accented English: no NATO interference. The scattered pieces began to coalesce, painting a disquieting picture. A clandestine rendezvous. A covert delivery. A negotiation unfolding outside official channels, circumventing international scrutiny. He recognized he was in uncharted waters. This transcended a mere faulty phone, it exceeded a routine security lapse. This had the potential to trigger far-reaching geopolitical repercussions. He needed to share this, but with whom? He glanced around his confined, disheveled workspace, feeling the oppressive weight of the knowledge he possessed that he was just a junior functionary, a nameless gear in a colossal machine. Would anyone give credence to his claims? Would they even care? Even as he grappled with his moral quandary, a fresh alert flickered on his monitor. An emergency request from the ambassador's office. The secure line was offline once more, whispers of treachery. The server room's monotonous thrum, usually an irritant, offered a strange solace tonight. Bending low over his monitor, the screen's cerulean and emerald glow illuminated Alex's weary features. Hours bled into each other, the only fuel a tepid brew and a growing unease. The scrambled code, echoes of a forbidden conversation, pressed in on him. He'd managed to isolate a particularly gnarly chunk of ciphertext, feeling in his gut that it was the key to the whole illicit exchange. He fed it into a decryption algorithm he'd Frankensteined from open-source scraps and sheer desperation. The decryption crawled forward, the progress bar inching across the display. He worried his lip, the stale aftertaste of the coffee clinging to his palate. Then, a flicker of progress, fragmentary phrases bubbled up from the digital mire. Cargo manifest, agreed price point, circumventing embargoes. Alex's pulse quickened. He cross-referenced the snippets with black market jargon, his fingers dancing across the keys. More pieces slotted into place. Advanced ordnance, bound for a Black Sea installation. The truth slammed into him. This wasn't some lone wolf operation, it was a brazen breach of international accords, a direct provocation against NATO's regional interests. The faint but unmistakable scent of Turkish complicity sent a chill down his spine. This was far beyond his remit. He transferred the decrypted snippets to a secure drive, his hands betraying a slight tremor. He needed an ally, someone trustworthy, but in the embassy's viper's nest, loyalty was both rare and perilous. Sarah Demir, the cultural attaché, more than that, his guiding hand, the woman who'd mentored him when he first landed in Istanbul. Naive and out of his depth, she had a keen mind, a web of contacts that seemed to permeate every layer of the city, and an unshakable moral center. He located her contact details, then paused. A direct call was too risky. He composed a terse email, utilizing a coded reference they'd invented during a particularly mind-numbing training session. Urgent matter. Require discussion regarding Byzantine mosaics post-haste. My flat, midnight. He hit send, then powered down his workstation, extracting the secure drive and slipping it into his pocket. The server room felt confining now, the hum morphing into a threatening snarl. Escape was paramount. The walk back to his apartment stretched into an ordeal. Each shadow seemed to harbor a lurking threat, every passing vehicle echoed like an encroaching pursuer. He reached his building, a faceless structure tucked away on a quiet street, and expelled a shaky breath. He reinforced the door locks, then circled the cramped living room, consumed by anticipation. Midnight came and went, stretching into 12:15, then 12:30. Alex's dread amplified with each tick of the clock. Had his message gotten through? Had she been compromised? Finally, a muted rap. He peered through the peephole. Sarah, her expression etched with concern, stood in the corridor. He pulled her inside without a word. "What's this about Byzantine mosaics, Alex?" she inquired, her tone hushed and grave. He cut to the chase. He removed the secure drive and attached it to his laptop. He displayed the decrypted segments, outlining how he'd stumbled upon the secret dialogue. Sarah listened intently, her features darkening as she scanned the screen. When he was finished, she remained silent, her gaze fixed on the display. This is volatile," she observed at length, her voice barely audible. "If this is substantiated." "I know," Alex interjected, urgency infusing his words, "I'm unsure who to confide in. I can't approach Ambassador Thompson with this, not without knowing who else might be implicated." Sarah inclined her head slowly. "You acted correctly seeking me out, Alex, but this is fraught with peril, immense peril." She ran a hand through her hair, a deep furrow creasing her forehead. "We must corroborate this, independently, with discretion that I maintain contacts within Turkish intelligence, individuals I trust that I can reach out, ascertain if they possess any knowledge regarding this alleged arms exchange. But what if they're in on it? Alex queried, a tremor of apprehension in his tone. That's a calculated risk, Sarah countered, her voice resolute. We advance with caution, one incremental step at a time. No formal channels, no traceable documents, merely whispers and veiled inquiries. She regarded him, her eyes reflecting a mix of solicitude and resolve. I'll initiate inquiries come morning. Until then, exercise vigilance, disclose this to no one, not even your closest confidants, and remain observant, Alex. Someone may already suspect your discovery. The price of truth. The rain hammered against Sarah's apartment window, blurring the neon glow of the Istanbul night. She scrolled through the encrypted data stream, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The information gleaned from her contact, Demir, was damning. Satellite images overlaid with shipping manifests, coded communications referencing the ordnance Alex had stumbled upon. It all pointed to a sophisticated, covert operation. Turkish officials, at least some, were undeniably involved. Turning a blind eye to the illicit transfer, possibly even facilitating it. A chill snaked down her spine, colder than the damp air seeping through the poorly sealed window frame. This wasn't just a minor infraction, this was a brazen violation of international law, a betrayal of allies. She needed to get this information to Ambassador Klein. Immediately, she saved the files to an encrypted drive. Her fingers trembling slightly. As she disconnected the drive, a sudden noise from the hallway outside her apartment made her jump. A muffled thud, followed by the scrape of metal against concrete. Her breath hitched in her throat. She switched off the light, plunging the room into darkness, and quietly moved to the peephole. Nothing, just the dimly lit hallway, empty and silent. Paranoia gnawed at her. Demir had warned her that some elements within Turkish intelligence were ruthless, willing to silence anyone who threatened their operation. Taking a deep breath, she decided to call Klein directly. She reached for her phone, the door splintered inward with a deafening crash. Alex found out the next morning that he arrived at the embassy, his usual anxiety about the day amplified tenfold. He'd barely slept, replaying the fragmented recording in his head, each click and hiss a reminder of the dangerous game he was now caught in. He needed to talk to Sarah, to confirm she'd passed the information along. But Sarah wasn't at her desk, her computer was off, the area eerily sterile. He approached her assistant, a young woman named Layla. Layla, do you know where Sarah is? Layla's eyes were red-rimmed, puffy. She looked up at him, her voice a shaky whisper. Haven't you heard? She's gone. Gone? What do you mean, gone? Alex felt a knot tighten in his stomach. She committed suicide last night. They found her at her apartment. Layla burst into fresh tears, burying her face in her hands. Suicide, the word echoed in Alex's head, a discordant, impossible note. Sarah, the vibrant, intelligent woman who'd calmly agreed to help him. It didn't make any sense. He rushed to Ambassador Klein's office, ignoring the disapproving glances of security personnel. He pushed past the secretary, barging into the ambassador's presence. Ambassador, I need to speak with you. It's about Sarah. Klein, a man who exuded an aura of controlled power, looked up from a stack of documents, his expression grim. Ramsey, this is highly inappropriate. I was just briefed on the tragic news about Ms. Walker. A terrible loss. But, sir, I don't think it was suicide. I think she was murdered. Alex blurted out, his voice trembling with urgency. Klein's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about? The police investigation is ongoing, but preliminary reports indicate a clear case of self-inflicted. No, sir. I know something she was working on, something sensitive. She was investigating a potential security breach, an arms deal. Alex trailed off, realizing he was revealing far too much. Klein stood up, his face hardening. Ramsey, you are out of line. This is a delicate situation, and your unsubstantiated accusations are not helping. I suggest you return to your department and refrain from spreading unfounded rumors. Is that understood? Alex stared at him, the weight of his isolation pressing down. He was alone. He knew too much, and now the only person who believed him was gone. He returned to his cubicle, his mind racing. The staged suicide, Klein's dismissive attitude, it all pointed to a cover-up, a conspiracy that reached far higher than he could have imagined. He glanced around nervously. The embassy, which had always felt like a safe haven, now felt like a cage. He was being watched, he was sure of it, every shadow seemed to lengthen, every conversation seemed to hush as he approached, that he felt eyes on him, assessing, calculating, that he reached for his phone, his fingers fumbling with the unfamiliar weight of fear that he had to get out, had to find someone he could trust, but who, and how could he be sure they weren't already compromised? The price of truth, he realized, might be his life, evasive action. The stale air of the ambassador's outer office tasted like regret. Alex shifted, the cheap suit he'd borrowed from a colleague suddenly feeling tight, suffocating that he hadn't slept, and the fluorescent lights hummed a discordant symphony with the frantic rhythm of his pulse. Holbrook's secretary, a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, finally buzzed him through. The ambassador was on the phone, his back to the door, the panoramic view of the Bosphorus glittering behind him. Absolutely. Mr. President, a resounding success, the Turkish government is fully on board. He chuckled, a practiced, resonant sound. Yes, sir. I'll keep you apprised. He swiveled, the smile still plastered on his face, but it faltered when he saw Alex. Ramsey, what is it? I'm rather busy. Sir, I need to speak with you. It's about Sarah. Holbrook's smile vanished completely. He waved Alex toward a chair, but remained standing, a silent power play. Sarah's death was a tragedy, a terrible shock. The police have assured me it was suicide. End of story. Sir, I don't believe it. I think she found something dangerous. I have evidence. Holbrook steepled his fingers, his gaze unwavering. Evidence? What evidence? The police have conducted a thorough investigation. Alex hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. She sent me a file before she died, an encrypted file that it concerns Demir and his associates. A flicker of something, annoyance, fear, crossed Holbrook's face, gone so quickly Alex almost missed it. Demir, what possible connection could he have to Sarah's personal struggles? Sir, I think Demir is involved in something illegal, something that reaches into the Turkish government. Holbrook sighed, a sound of theatrical exasperation. Ramsey, you're letting grief cloud your judgment. Demir is a valuable partner. We rely on him. I won't tolerate unsubstantiated accusations. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a low, persuasive murmur. The United States and Turkey have a strong relationship. We don't want some junior analyst stirring up trouble based on conjecture. But sir. No buts, Ramsey. I understand you're upset, but this is above your pay grade. Let the authorities handle it, and for your own sake, I suggest you drop this. He clapped Alex on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a warning. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have important matters to attend to. Dismissed, Alex left the office, the ambassador's words echoing in his head. He knew then, with chilling certainty, that he was truly alone. Holbrook wasn't just indifferent, he was actively covering something up. Back in his cramped cubicle, the fluorescent light seemed to mock him. He couldn't trust anyone inside the embassy. He had one card left to play. He pulled up David's contact information. David, the journalist he'd met at a bar a few weeks ago, a cynical, chain-smoking American with a nose for stories. He'd mentioned working for a small, independent news outlet. His fingers trembled as he typed out a message. Need to talk, urgent, secure line only, can you meet? He sent it, then deleted the message from his sent items. He spent the next hour scrubbing his workstation, deleting temporary files, clearing his browser history, anything that might connect him to Sarah or the encrypted file. Paranoia gnawed at him. He felt eyes on him, watching, waiting. Finally, David responded, park across from the Blue Mosque. 8 p.m., come alone. He knew it was a risk, but he had no other choice. The afternoon crawled by. He avoided eye contact, kept his head down, and pretended to work. He downloaded a portable encryption program onto a USB drive, a program Sarah had recommended for secure file transfers. Then, he copied the encrypted file onto the drive and meticulously erased its original location from his hard drive. As dusk settled over Istanbul, casting long shadows across the ancient city, Alex slipped out of the embassy, his heart hammering against his ribs. He felt like a ghost, moving through a world that suddenly felt hostile and dangerous. He was a pawn in a game he didn't understand, and the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. Framed. The knock on Alex's apartment door reverberated through the small space, sharp and insistent. He wasn't expecting anyone. David wasn't due for another hour, and he hadn't told anyone else where he lived. He peered through the peephole. 2 men in dark suits stood in the hallway, their faces grim. Embassy security. He braced himself and opened the door. Gentlemen, Alexander Ramsey. The taller of the two stepped forward, flashing a badge. We need you to come with us. What's this about? Alex asked, his stomach twisting. Espionage, the man stated flatly. You are suspected of compromising classified information and engaging in activities detrimental to the interests of the United States. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Espionage.it was absurd. That's ridiculous. That I haven't done anything. We have reason to believe otherwise. You have the right to remain silent. Alex listened to the familiar Miranda rights, a detached observer in his own nightmare. They escorted him to a waiting car, the city lights blurring past as they drove him back to the embassy. The familiar route felt alien, tainted with suspicion that he was taken to a small, windowless room, the air thick with tension. Ambassador Holbrook was already there, his face a mask of disappointment. Alex, he said, his voice unusually stern, I truly hoped this wasn't true. Sir, I swear, I have no idea what you're talking about, Alex protested, his voice rising in desperation. Someone's trying to set me up. Holbrook sighed, producing a thin file. We have evidence, Alex, encrypted files sent from your embassy computer to an unauthorized external server. We've traced the IP address back to you. Alex stared at the document, his mind racing that he hadn't sent any files. Someone had used his credentials, framed him perfectly, but who, and why now? Just as he was about to expose Demir. I didn't do this, he insisted, his voice trembling. Someone is trying to silence me because of what Sarah discovered. Holbrook's expression hardened. Sarah's death was a tragedy, Alex, but let's not jump to conclusions. Right now, you're the one in serious trouble. He paused, his gaze unwavering. You have 72 hours to prove your innocence, Mr. Ramsey, otherwise, you will be handed over to Turkish authorities. 72 hours. It was a death sentence. That he knew how the Turkish justice system worked, especially when it involved sensitive matters. That he'd be lost in the system, forgotten. That's not enough time. Alex pleaded, but Holbrook remained unmoved. That's all I can give you. Security will escort you back to your apartment to gather your belongings. Consider this your only opportunity to clear your name. Back in his apartment, with 2 guards watching his every move, Alex felt a surge of panic. He grabbed his laptop, a few changes of clothes, and Sarah's encrypted drive. He needed to disappear, to find David, to get the truth out before it was too late. As they led him back towards the car, Alex saw his opportunity. A delivery truck was blocking the entrance to the building. He feigned a stumble, knocking into one of the guards. In the momentary confusion, he bolted. He ran, adrenaline coursing through his veins, weaving through the crowded Istanbul streets. The guards shouted after him, their voices quickly fading into the cacophony of the city. He didn't dare look back. He found refuge in a crowded market, the scent of spices and the sounds of bartering masking his presence. He needed a plan, a way to disappear completely. He knew he couldn't stay in Istanbul. They'd be watching all the exits. He remembered a contact Sarah had mentioned once, a smuggler who operated near the Syrian border. Risky, but it was his only option. He found a burner phone and made the call, his voice barely a whisper. I need passage, he said, giving the code phrase Sarah had provided. It's urgent. A gruff voice on the other end replied, meet me at the old docks, midnight, come alone. He hung up, his heart pounding. He was officially a fugitive, hunted by both governments. He had 72 hours to clear his name, to expose the truth, or he would lose everything. He glanced up at the sky, the setting sun casting long shadows over the city. The clock was ticking. Sarah's secret Khalil, the smuggler, left Alex a safe distance outside Istanbul, depositing him near a boisterous market square crackling with morning energy. Alex blended into the throng, the flat taste of Khalil's bread a lingering reminder of his precarious situation. Movement was paramount. Holbrook wouldn't delay in branding him a turncoat. Sarah's apartment. He had to reach it. As he navigated the city's intricate web of streets, a prickling sensation crawled across his skin, paranoia, or the hunter's gaze already upon him. He darted into a grimy alleyway, the pungent reek of spices and decay stinging his nostrils. He couldn't afford to succumb to fear. He arrived at Sarah's building, an unremarkable apartment block nestled in a blue-collar district. Using the spare key Sarah had entrusted to him, a gesture he dismissed as mere eccentricity, he let himself in. Now, that quirk might be his salvation. The apartment remained a familiar haven, a cozy disarray of books and souvenirs accumulated from her travels. An unfinished canvas stood on an easel, its explosion of color a sharp contrast to the bleakness engulfing him. He forced concentration, nostalgia was a luxury he couldn't afford. He started with her desk, meticulously examining each drawer. Nothing immediately apparent. He shifted to the bookshelf, his fingertips tracing the spines, seeking a deviation, concealed. Behind a dog-eared copy of Midnight Express, he discovered it, a plain envelope taped to the shelf's back. Inside rested a key, a small, silver key etched with the number 312. A safe deposit box, but where? His mind raced. He recalled Sarah mentioning a bank branch near the Grand Bazaar, a place she used for certain things. There wasn't time for a thorough search of every bank in the city. He had to trust his gut. The Grand Bazaar assaulted the senses, a swirling vortex of vibrant hues, clamorous sounds, and exotic aromas he wove through the crush of tourists and hawkers, his heart hammering against his ribs. The bank stood apart, a conservative structure tucked into a quiet side street. He approached the teller, striving for a casual demeanor. "I need access to safe deposit box 312, he stated, his voice hushed. The teller, her eyes carrying the weight of countless transactions, requested identification. He presented the forged ID Khalil had supplied, sweat slicking his palms. Her scrutiny stretched into an unbearable eternity before she finally nodded. He was ushered into a small, private room. An attendant produced the box. It possessed a heft that surprised him. He slid the key into the lock, his hands unsteady. The mechanism clicked open. Within, amongst personal documents, lay a slim, leather notebook and a USB drive. He opened the notebook. Names leaped out at him, names he recognized with chilling clarity. High-ranking Turkish officials, prominent businessmen, even an individual from the U.S. Embassy. Beneath each name were intricate strings of numbers and letters, far too complex for simple accounts. Encoded transactions. He plugged the USB drive into the laptop Khalil provided, its battery already dwindling. The drive contained encrypted files. He deployed basic decryption tools, but they proved useless. This was a sophisticated lock. He returned to the notebook, leafing through its pages. A name snagged his attention, Demir. Below it, a long sequence of numbers followed by the initials, KRG. He'd heard whispers of Demir, a spectral figure linked to Kurdish insurgent factions. Was he complicit? The puzzle pieces began aligning, creating a monstrous picture. An arms deal, Turkish officials, Kurdish rebels, and someone within the U.S. Embassy, all collaborating. But who was the hidden hand, and what were they trading? Sarah had stumbled upon this conspiracy. That was the reason for her death. A wave of sickness churned within him. He was out of his depth, drowning in a sea of intrigue. He needed to relay this information to someone who could act, but who could he trust? He copied the USB drive's contents onto his laptop, meticulously replaced everything in the safe deposit box, returning the box to the attendant. His mind spun. Emerging from the bank, he spotted them. Two men in dark suits, observing him from across the lane. They began moving in his direction. He bolted. He was the prey. And utterly alone, Istanbul underground. The downpour had ceased, leaving Istanbul's atmosphere thick with the mingled sense of damp stone and acrid exhaust. Alex gripped the USB drive, its data his only tether, as he plunged into Beyoğlu's bewildering streets, his paranoia a relentless shadow. He required a cryptanalyst, someone detached from the embassy's web, someone he could actually place his faith in. Essentially, anyone but himself. He located her in a basement cafe, shadows clinging to the walls, the air saturated with robust Turkish coffee and the soft thrum of hard-working computers. Elif Demir, a name spoken with reverence in clandestine online forums, was bent over a laptop, her fingers a blur across the keys. As Alex approached, her dark eyes lifted, sharp and probing. Elif Demir, he ventured, his voice a near inaudible murmur. She offered no verbal confirmation, merely arched an eyebrow, indicating the vacant chair. Alex settled, acutely aware of the other patrons, their features indistinct in the smoky gloom. He slid the USB drive across the worn tabletop. "I need this unlocked," he stated. "Sarah." It was Sarah's. Elif retrieved the drive, turning it thoughtfully in her fingers. "Sarah, the embassy staffer, word gets around." A fleeting shadow of sorrow crossed her face, swiftly replaced by an unyielding pragmatism. "You believe her death hinged on this?" Alex affirmed with a tight nod, his throat constricted. "I'm sure of it. That it implicates individuals within the embassy." Elif interfaced the drive with her laptop. Cascades of code streamed across the screen, heavily shielded, she observed, her brow furrowed in concentration. Someone desperately didn't want prying eyes on this. Hours dissolved into a tense ballet of keystrokes and hushed exchanges. Elif labored relentlessly, her focus unwavering. Alex observed, anxiety gnawing at him with each passing moment, the burden of Sarah's fate, the chilling realization that he was marked, weighed heavily. He gleaned glimpses of the hidden files as they gradually materialized, financial transfers, encrypted missives, shipping records. Finally, nearing 3 a.m., Elif straightened, a satisfying series of cracks emanating from her. "Knuckles, we're in," she announced, her tone subdued. "What lies within is complex." She brought up a specific transaction, highlighting it for emphasis. Substantial funds, disguised as payment for building supplies. However, the beneficiary, it's a front company, tied to a Chinese operative named Zhao Wei, known for supplying arms to volatile regions. Arms? Alex's stomach plummeted. Elif confirmed with a nod. "And examine this," she indicated another file, a string of coded messages. "They utilize a cipher unlike any I've encountered, but I cracked it. They are coordinating deliveries, citing locations in eastern Turkey, near the Syrian frontier." "Who is the intended recipient?" Alex probed, his voice raspy. Elif scrolled down, her expression darkening. "Harder to ascertain definitively, but there are allusions to Kurd, suggesting a faction within the Kurdish resistance. And note this email address." She pointed to a partially obscured address, but Alex recognized the domain. "It originates from the embassy. Someone internal is complicit." "We suspected as much," Alex stated, frustrated. "This is a different order of betrayal," Elif retorted. "These messages aren't solely about transporting weapons, they concern leverage, influence. This Zhao Wei isn't simply an arms merchant, that he's acquiring something greater, power, perhaps, and someone within Turkey is facilitating it." She displayed a map of Turkey, marking several points. "These are the exchange points, where the weapons are being handed over. Note that they are proximate to towns harboring substantial Kurdish communities, but also close to Turkish military installations." Alex scrutinized the map, the fragments of the puzzle coalescing. The Chinese are arming Kurdish factions, with the assistance of Turkish functionaries. What strategic advantage does that gain them? Elif offered a shrug. "Perhaps they seek to destabilize the region. They might be pursuing their own agenda. What I can state with certainty is that someone is engaged in a perilous game, and Sarah paid the ultimate price." She powered down the laptop, her eyes locking with Alex's. "Exercise extreme caution, Alex, this extends far beyond what you perceive, far beyond." The cafe proprietor commenced stacking chairs, a clear cue for departure. Alex stood, feeling a rush of both adrenaline and trepidation. That he possessed a name, a connection, a potential motive, yet he remained isolated, pursued, and hopelessly outmatched. "Thank you, Elif," he acknowledged. "I'm unsure how to adequately express my gratitude." Elif dismissed his words with a wave. "Expose their treachery, Alex, that alone will suffice." She paused, her gaze intense. "And survive." As Alex ventured back into the Istanbul night, the city exuded a changed aura. The familiar symphonies of the city, the calls to prayer, the distant thrum of traffic, now seemed sinister, permeated with the lurking threat of unseen adversaries. That he was now immersed in Istanbul's underbelly, where the rules were rewritten, and survival hinged on resourcefulness, fortitude, and a sprinkling of sheer luck. He had a considerable journey ahead, but he now possessed a viable starting point, and he had Elif. That sufficed, for the moment. The Grand Bazaar ambush. The aroma of exotic spices, aged leather, and cloying Turkish delight, usually a comforting embrace, now felt like a noose tightening around Elif's throat. She gripped the USB drive, its surface polished and treacherous against her sweaty hand. "They're on to us," she whispered, her voice swallowed by the clamor of haggling merchants and jabbering sightseers. Alex surveyed the bustling crowd, his instincts screaming. Ever since they'd left her apartment, he'd been stalked by the feeling of unseen eyes, a disquiet that solidified into grim certainty within the bazaar's dizzying maze. Then he saw them, two men, clad in unremarkable clothes, their faces impassive and alert, threading through the throng with a focus that belied their mundane appearance. "Move," he shouted, seizing Elif's wrist. the vibrant spectacle of the bazaar dissolved into a kaleidoscope of motion as they bolted, its rich hues and alluring scents now a taunting reminder of the peril dogging their heels. Alex navigated the crowded lanes with fierce resolve, his movements powered by adrenaline and a primal fear for Elif's well-being that he shoved past bewildered shoppers. Scattering displays of gleaming lanterns and intricate carpets, the pursuit was relentless. Their pursuers moved with disciplined precision, their voices, sharp and curt, slicing through the din as they issued commands in Turkish. Cut them off, don't let them escape the bazaar. Alex steered Elif sharply around a corner, into a dim recess piled high with sacks of saffron and turmeric. In here, he urged, wrestling aside the heavy burlap. They squeezed through a tight gap, emerging into a small, desolate courtyard. A brief sanctuary. Alex leaned against a time-worn stone wall, lungs burning. Elif trembled, her eyes wide pools of terror. What do we do now? She breathed. Before Alex could respond, a figure materialized from the shadows, barring their path. A woman, statuesque and formidable, with eyes like chips of ice. A dark suit accentuated her angular features, and an earpiece winked in the muted light. Behind her, the two men from the bazaar appeared, their faces like granite. Alex Ramsey, the woman stated, her voice utterly devoid of warmth. We've been expecting you. Alex's mind raced, sifting through possibilities. Turkish intelligence that he should have foreseen this. They knew about Sarah, they knew he possessed the drive, and they clearly knew about Elif. Who are you people? He demanded, stalling for time. The woman offered a mirthless smile. Irrelevant, what matters is the USB drive. Hand it over, now. Alex tightened his grip on Elif's hand, his knuckles white that he understood the stakes, the names, the illegal dealings, the irrefutable proof capable of dismantling the entire network. That he couldn't allow it to fall into their clutches. I have no idea what you're talking about, he lied, his voice wavering. The woman inclined her head towards her men. Take the girl. With swift, brutal efficiency, the two men surged forward, wrenching Alex from Elif's side. She screamed, her gaze imploring as they hauled her away. Elif! Alex bellowed, fighting against their hold. He broke free, but the woman interposed herself, cutting off his path. You can't save her, Alex, she said, her voice a chilling monotone. But you can salvage yourself. Give me the drive, and you walk. Alex stared at her, his thoughts reeling that he was ensnared, caught in a labyrinth of deception and treachery. He glanced at Elif, her face a mask of anguish as they dragged her towards a waiting black van. He faced an impossible choice, a decision that could irrevocably alter the destinies of everyone involved: the evidence, the conspiracy, the opportunity to expose the rot, or Elif. The van doors slammed shut. Swallowing Elif's cries, Alex felt a wave of impotent rage, a searing fury threatening to consume him. He knew what he had to do. He reached into his pocket, his fingers finding the cold plastic of the USB drive. He locked eyes with the woman, her gaze shimmering with anticipation. All right, he rasped, his voice thick with despair. You win. But even as the words left his lips, a plan began to coalesce in his mind. This wasn't the end. He refused to let them win. He would retrieve Elif and expose the truth, regardless of the personal cost. He only needed a breath. An opening. He extended his hand, the USB drive resting in his open palm. The woman reached for it, her fingers closing around the small, innocuous device. This was merely the overture. He was far from being broken. Inside the lion's den, the city noises faded to a dull hum as Alex slipped through the service entrance of the Turkish military headquarters. His borrowed maintenance uniform felt like a second skin, itchy with sweat and anticipation. He'd spent hours studying the blueprints smuggled to him by a contact in the Istanbul police, a man who, like Alex, believed in a Turkey that didn't deal in shadows. The blueprints showed a labyrinth of corridors, security checkpoints, and restricted areas. His target, a holding cell on the third floor, and beyond that, General Atay's office. He moved with a practiced calm, mimicking the casual gait of the real maintenance workers he'd observed earlier. The ID badge he'd forged, complete with a blurry photo of a vaguely similar face, passed the first checkpoint without a hitch. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence he projected. The air grew colder as he ascended, the sterile scent of antiseptic replacing the street's earthy smells. Surveillance cameras swiveled like watchful eyes, their lenses Reflecting the harsh fluorescent light that he avoided them where he could, sticking to blind spots memorized from the blueprints. On the third floor, the tension thickened, heavily armed guards stood sentinel outside each door. Alex knew he couldn't bluff his way through here. He ducked into a utility closet. The cramped space filled with the metallic tang of cleaning fluids. He pulled out the small EMP device he'd constructed from scavenged embassy parts. It was a gamble, but it was his only chance. Taking a deep breath, he activated the device and tossed it down the corridor. A brief flash of light, a high-pitched whine, and then, darkness. The emergency lights flickered on moments later, casting long, distorted shadows. The guards, momentarily disoriented, scrambled to understand what had happened. Alex used the chaos to his advantage. He moved swiftly, silently, toward the holding cells. He found Elif in the third cell, huddled on a cot, her face pale but resolute. "Alex, what are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Getting you out," he said, working quickly to pick the lock with a hairpin he discreetly pocketed from his hotel room. The lock clicked open. "Atay," Elif said, her eyes flashing with anger. "He wants the information on the drive. He knows what's on it." "We'll deal with him," Alex said, pulling her to her feet. "Let's go." They moved through the darkened corridors, Elif's knowledge of the building proving invaluable. They bypassed several guards, utilizing the shadows and the lingering confusion from the EMP. Finally, they reached the door to Atay's office. Alex kicked the door open, revealing Atay seated behind a large mahogany desk, a look of surprised fury on his face. Two armed guards stood behind him. "Ramsey," Atay growled, his voice thick with contempt. "I expected better, and you, Elif. I am deeply disappointed." "You're the one who should be disappointed, General," Alex said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Disappointed that your little scheme is about to be exposed." Atay chuckled, a harsh, mirthless sound. "Exposed? You have no proof, just accusations." "Oh, I have proof," Alex said, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a small voice recorder. "Everything you discussed with the Chinese delegation, the arms deal, the kickbacks. It's all here." Atay's face paled. He gestured sharply to his guards. "Seize him." The guards moved forward, but Elif was faster. She lunged at one of them, disarming him with a move Alex hadn't known she possessed. He took on the other guard, adrenaline fueling his movements. He dodged a blow, landing a punch that sent the guard staggering. Atay watched the struggle, his eyes filled with rage. He reached into his desk drawer, pulling out a pistol. "This ends here," he said, leveling the weapon at Alex. Before Atay could fire, the door burst open again. This time, it was Alex's. Contact from the Istanbul police, followed by several uniformed officers. "General Atay," the officer said, his voice firm, "you are under arrest for treason, corruption, and conspiracy to commit murder. Truth and consequences." Sirens screamed, the sound amplified as a procession of black vehicles careened to a stop before the military complex, hidden in the umbra of nearby buildings. Alex tensed, Elif's reassuring hand a gentle pressure on his arm. Beside them, Demir, the Istanbul detective, offered a curt nod, his expression grave. "They've come for Atay." Inside, pandemonium reigned. Troops, alerted by Demir's tip-off, surged into Atay's quarters. Surprise contorted the general's features as they took him into custody. He bucked against their grip, a torrent of invective spilling from his lips. "This is mutiny, you'll all regret this." But his defiance rang false. The evidence Alex had secured, the incriminating recording of Atay detailing the illicit arms deal and implicating high-ranking officials, had already begun its corrosive journey through the military's upper echelons. His machinations were unraveling. Demir appeared, his face etched with concern. "Atay is in custody, the building is secured." He turned his gaze towards Alex, a glint of respect flickering in his eyes. "The real challenge begins now." That challenge wore the guise of Ambassador Holbrook. Alex understood that exposing Atay was merely the opening salvo. The ambassador's complicity, his calculated decision to ignore blatant corruption for the sake of political expediency, was the malignant core of the entire scheme. They reached the U.S. Embassy as dawn bled across the sky, painting the horizon in hues of lavender and rose. Marines, forewarned of the unfolding crisis, stood guard, their faces masks of taut anticipation. Alex, Elif, and Demir were ushered directly into Holbrook's presence. The ambassador, seated behind a vast mahogany desk, wore an expression of barely suppressed fury. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" he snapped, his voice laced with ice. Demir advanced. Ambassador, we possess evidence connecting you to a criminal conspiracy, the facilitation of an illegal arms transaction that we require your full cooperation. Holbrook dismissed the accusation with a derisive snort. This is preposterous, I demand to speak to the president at once. Alex stepped forward, placing a small data storage device on the polished surface. Contained within is a recording of your conversation with Atay, Ambassador, specifically, the segment in which he outlines his scheme to supply weapons to Kurdish insurgents, destabilizing the region, and your agreement to turn a blind eye in exchange for Atay's discretion regarding certain personal matters. Holbrook's carefully crafted composure shattered, his eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape route that he understood the trap had sprung. This is a fabrication, a politically motivated smear campaign. Is it, Ambassador? Alex pressed. Or is it accountability finally knocking at your door? The silence that followed was oppressive, almost tangible. The weight of Holbrook's ambition, his compromises, his betrayals, permeated the air. Finally, he exhaled, the fight visibly leaving him. Fine, he conceded, his voice a mere thread of sound. What do you want? The ensuing days were a chaotic blur of inquiries, depositions, and media coverage. The story detonated, igniting a conflagration of controversy that engulfed both Ankara and Washington. Atay was formally indicted on charges of treason and graft. Other co-conspirators were taken into custody. Holbrook, facing both impeachment and criminal charges, resigned in disgrace. His meticulously constructed reputation as a diplomatic luminary lay in ruins. Alex was exonerated, the allegations of espionage were dropped, and he was lauded as a hero. Yet, the triumph tasted like ashes that he had unveiled the truth, but the price had been staggering that he had glimpsed the depravity that lurked beneath the veneer of power, the ethical corners cut, the falsehoods readily embraced. That he stood on the small balcony of his apartment, overlooking the swirling waters of the Bosphorus. The city glittered below, a sprawling tableau of illumination and darkness. That he had arrived in Istanbul brimming with idealism, eager to serve his nation. Now, cynicism clung to him like a shroud, his faith in the system deeply eroded. Elif joined him, resting a comforting hand on his shoulder. You did the right thing, Alex, she murmured. You made a difference. He met her gaze, seeing in her unwavering dedication to justice a spark that reignited a flicker of hope within him. Perhaps she was right, perhaps exposing the truth, regardless of the sacrifices, was ultimately worthwhile. But one thing remained irrevocably altered. He could never perceive the world through the same untainted lens again. A new path. The weight of the resignation letter felt disproportionate to its few pages. Ambassador Holbrook's exit had been a clean cut. That he'd been the very image of American influence in Turkey, then vanished, consumed by the intricate bureaucracy he once commanded. The State Department's PR machine was already humming, meticulously buffing the sharp edges of reality. One last circuit of the embassy's familiar corridors, the gleaming floors, the portraits of bygone ambassadors, the muted conversations echoing from behind closed doors. Everything now felt tainted, different. Demir's face haunted him, the frantic appeal in his gaze just before the world tilted. The ghost of the bullet throbbed, a constant reminder of truth's cost. His footsteps led him to his old cubicle, depressingly sterile, as if his tenure here had been meticulously staged for a purpose he now rejected. He'd cleared out his personal effects weeks before, the few photos and keepsakes he'd employed to humanize this impersonal space. Now, just an empty box. He dropped the letter on the immaculate desk. A gesture, not a submission. He wouldn't lend legitimacy to their charade. They anticipated this. He was the rogue element that had disturbed their carefully balanced equation. Stepping outside, the Istanbul sun struck with almost brutal force. The city assaulted his senses, the muezzin's call cascading from the minarets, the alluring scent of roasting chestnuts, the incessant blare of taxi horns. A vivid contrast to the sanitized environment he'd just escaped. He paused on the pavement, drawing a deep breath. The air tasted new, somehow liberating. He was adrift, unsure of his next move, only knowing he couldn't remain. He couldn't return to a life of quiet acquiescence, of swallowing the stories spoon-fed by those in authority. Elif, safe now, beginning anew far from Istanbul, beyond the shadows that had threatened to engulf her. He'd helped her flee, and in that act, discovered a glimmer of hope. He owed her more than sanctuary. He owed her the pledge that her suffering wouldn't be in vain. He retrieved the encrypted flash drive Demir had entrusted to him, A digital Pandora's box holding secrets that could topple empires that he'd kept it untouched since Atay's arrest. A part of him recoiled from its potential revelations, fearing the darkness he might unleash, but he couldn't back down. He couldn't ignore the rampant injustice that he'd witnessed, the consequences when power ran amok, when greed eclipsed morality. He hailed a taxi, directing the driver to an address he hadn't seen in months, his cramped apartment in Beyoğlu, humble, but his own. A place for reflection, for strategy, for deciding what came next. As the taxi weaved through the thronged streets, Alex gazed out the window, his mind racing. He couldn't confront this alone. He needed allies, trustworthy individuals, those who shared his dedication to integrity. He recalled the journalists he'd encountered, those who had risked everything to expose the truth. He thought of the whistleblowers, those courageous souls who had sacrificed all to reveal corruption. He knew the path ahead was fraught. He would face opposition, threats, perhaps even violence. But he was no longer the naive diplomat who had arrived in Istanbul with idealistic visions. He had gazed into the abyss of power, the clandestine truths concealed beneath the surface. He was transformed, seasoned, informed, and resolved to use his hard-won insights to make a difference. He would crack the flash drive's code, dissect the data, and unearth the corruption it concealed. He would become a burr in the saddle of those who wielded authority unscrupulously, a champion for the unheard. He knew the journey would be arduous, but he was ready to embark. His destination remained uncertain, but silence was not an option. He carried a burden, not merely to Elif and Demir, but to himself. The taxi arrived at his building. He paid the fare and stepped onto the pavement, the flash drive a weighty promise in his pocket. His gaze lifted to the skyline, the jagged silhouette against the twilight. A new beginning, intimidating, perhaps even terrifying, but exhilarating. He had everything to gain, and nothing left to lose. The battle for justice had only just commenced.